Well, good morning, everybody. Just want to start us off by looking back over the last 7 days, because during this time period, we've had 2 blizzard events that have hit parts of the northern plains. We've had over 2,200 reports of severe weather, including on March 31st, one of the largest tornado outbreaks in U.S. history. We've seen during this time period large dry slots forming on the backside of these storm systems, which is pushing the drought situation in the southern and central plains even farther into the spring time period. We've had multiple rounds of very, very cold air coming in on the northern side of this. In fact, right now, as this system that we've been watching for the last few days exits, it is going to increase the risk of some strong storms in Virginia today, and we still have some remnant ice that's up here in parts of Quebec after yesterday's ice storm that hit this entire region. Now, coming back to some of the discussion about snow, this is what the last 3 days looks like here in terms of snow, total snow accumulation. So the models did hone in on this area quite early and did a fairly good job at predicting this large swath of 6 to some places over a foot of snow in this area. And what it gives us is our latest, let's blow that up so you can see it, there we go, latest snow water equivalent map. So we have nearly 80% of what we're calling the northern plains upper Midwest covered in snow right now, with an average snow depth of almost 10 inches. And in that, there's up to 21 inches of liquid, but most of it is somewhere between the 2 and 12 inch range. We still have extensive snowpack throughout the west. That's something we covered earlier this week in great detail. Now, there is some good news about this pattern. The cold air that is currently occupying that region, I mean, look, we have single-digit temperatures down here today. We are going to watch a pretty substantial warm-up start to take place across the country, all right? But as the main frontal boundary, which is slicing through this region right here, stalls out, we're going to see some very wet weather here, and most of the increase in the activity in terms of precipitation is going to target the Pacific Northwest. A lot of the country is going to get a rest from the very adverse weather we've seen lately, just except 2 places, right down through here in the south and southeast, and then in the Pacific Northwest. Today's all-hazards weather map is starting to point that out. We see flood watches have been issued for this region as the frontal boundary stalls out here. And you can see the extent of the colder air prompting these freeze warnings and frost advisories here in Missouri and Kansas. But I think we just need to remember that we still have one more day of the potential for strong storms going through parts of Virginia toward Maryland and Delaware here. And this will all be sitting on this lingering frontal boundary in this area. But for many throughout the country, the next 7 days opens up some of our first spring windows. And what you've got here is a 7-day forecast for total precipitation. And it's heaviest here over the next couple of days in the southeast midweek next week, but much of the Midwest, the central and southern plains, much of the northern plains, Canadian prairie, and through the southwest into California, it goes drier. And then we're going to see the east dry out after this frontal boundary clears. The reason for this is that the jet stream is moving to a new configuration temporarily, where these deep troughs that have come sweeping through the west and ejecting toward the Great Lakes, they're going to start to just fade for a while. And that's because the pattern's going through a bit of adjustment, where we have troughs that flank North America. We have this one here in Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska, and one here that's between the Hudson Bay and Greenland, but south of it in the North Atlantic. So if this is where the troughs are, the jet stream just wants to bulge up a bit in this area, and that's the wrong direction to produce big spring storm systems. It has to come out of the southwest to do that. So we ask how long that lasts, because we get a couple of good pulses of heat that come from the west into the central United States. We can almost see this high over low block that sets up. Now, we can't technically call it a block because I don't think it'll last 10 days, and that's a kind of a standard on determining a block, is how long it lasts. But what this does mean is midweek to late week next week, we could be watching for low pressure systems to spin up over the south and southeast, keeping this area cooler and wetter, while much drier and warmer to the north. But notice we continue to bring systems in through early next week into the Pacific Northwest. Now, what we're going to watch very carefully, because you can still see this high over low pattern, is how does this transition once we get out there to mid-month. We're going to talk about this again in a few moments. But before we do, let's go have a look at what this means on our European model forecast. So this is the system that produced the ice, the blizzard, the severe weather outbreak. We're going to watch later today as the chances for those strong to severe storms line up here in Virginia, parts of North Carolina, but the frontal boundary stretches. And while we see that going on, there is our next front that kind of pushes into the Pacific Northwest. This is Thursday night. Getting into Friday morning, high pressure dominates the mid part of the country. The frontal boundary lingers in this area, so more showers and storms, and you continue to see from Northern California through Oregon and Washington better chances of rainfall. This is Friday night. getting into the weekend. The latest European model run does put a really quick hit right into this area of some snow, but its temperatures are going to be very closely hovering to freezing right in through here. This is early Saturday morning, so we do need to watch this right here. But most of the action is going to be into the southeast through the weekend while we watch the northwest take on another storm system on Sunday. We know that the temperatures are going to really open up in this area next week. There could be some scattered storms in this area. Okay, this is on Monday. But then we're going to watch a low develop here over the southeast, maybe by next Tuesday, Wednesday, while we have one that comes along the west coast, maybe adding more snow to the Sierra Nevada mountains. That's kind of what our next 7 days looks like in total. I do think that after the 13th, 14th, we're going to flip this pattern back to what we have been seeing. I can't really comment just yet on the risk of severity or more snow out of it, but we are going to see this pattern revert back to where it was. But since I mentioned snow, let me show you how much we're expecting for the northwest. Let's take this out here all the way to next Tuesday. So the next few systems are putting down some snow at high elevation, but the troughs do deepen later after this time period. And if I just go ahead and show you a 10-day forecast map, you start to notice that once we get out there past day 7 and beyond, more snow for the Sierra, more snow for the interior, mountains here in the Rockies out of this deeper trough that's developing there. But we need to distill this down into a couple of different maps here. Let's just talk about these next 10 days before we get fully into that week 2 pattern. These are the maps that show you the probability over the next 10 days of getting at least an inch of liquid. So we see those 2 target areas we talked about being the wettest. This is the probability of 2 inches. So very heavy rainfall down here in the southeast and then the west coast here along the I-5 corridor. And might as well step it up to 4 just so you can see the potential for the very heavy rain in this area. And we can also look at this and see who's going to be dry. So this is the probability of getting less than a ½ inch. And what you notice is where that ridge opens here, this is going to be warmer and much drier in this area compared to climatological average. When I talk about warm, watch these temperatures rebound. So there's that stalled out front I told you about. This is today's high temperatures compared to normal. By Friday into Saturday, look at the warmth rebounding here in the midsection of the country. This is all snow-cooled air. This is rain-cooled air here. Then what we've got is Sunday into Monday and Tuesday. Now the big difference here is that this is not a warm sector opening ahead of a big low pressure system. This is now just a warm region under a broader ridge. And what we see is that the west goes back over cooler. A broad area of warmth spreads throughout much of the plains, central United States, into the northeast. And this is starting this longer term, time period of more mild conditions. Now, just thinking about this warmer air coming in and knowing that it's going to be drier during that time period, I expect a lot of field work. I just want to remind folks, this was a window of opportunity that I did not see 2-3 weeks ago. When I was forecasting for this time in April, it wasn't clear to me that this was going to open up quite like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our forecasting system to give us a couple of numbers. I'm just going to pick a random place in, how about Iowa? How about Cedar Rapids? Okay, so using our forecast tool, click on Cedar Rapids. What I want to show you here is that, remember, you can get all your normal forecast stats, plus look right here. They're expecting to accumulate 71 GDDs in the next 7 days. It's going to be 12 degrees on average warmer than normal. But I want you to slide down to the bottom and remember that I've got down here 10-day soil conditions from the European model. And what's important to see is that for Cedar Rapids, starting next Tuesday, they're expected to see pretty consistent soil temperatures at 4 inches above 50 Fahrenheit. Now, I want to remind you that normal last frost dates in Iowa, for example, are mid to late April. So I just want you to know that things are beginning to open up. And this is what the average temperature forecast looks like. That's a 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. As we've been talking, the high over low keeps it cool in the southeast, plus the rain. You then can see right in through here the snow feedback. And then the west, starting to see more troughs, brings in the cooler conditions. So this is a much shorter duration warm spell than forecast for the west, now showing up in the models. So we play this all the way out there to the time period of April 16th through the 21st. That's what we're seeing. And later on today, we'll get new mid-range weather forecast data. What I do want to remind you, though, is that the pattern will likely return to that. And what that could mean going out is that the precipitation anomalies for week 2 could start to really just increase from west to east. Could be important for the plains. Now, this is no good to see all this extra precipitation in the northern plains where we'll be fighting a flood. But if we could actually back up the dry line farther to the west and bring more moisture to the southern plains, that would be outstanding. We can see that this is the area that over the last 30 days, of course, has missed out on so much of this precipitation. And even though this stalled out frontal boundary right in through here is going to add more rain to the mid-south, it will increase two areas that need more precipitation going into the spring, just thinking about the longer-term water health. So in today's report, I cover all of that, plus we also talk about the recent precipitation anomalies or ranks by climate district. I'll cover this again in tonight's in-depth report. Quick update on South America. No real changes here. Wet throughout much of Brazil except for Rio Grande do Sul, Uruguay, and then along the Parana River Basin, finishing here into Buenos Aires. So that story continues to be almost the same. This will really push the safrinha crop. And then the main thing we're going to cover in tonight's in-depth report is this. Okay, these are the ocean temperatures we've got now. La Nina gone. El Nino attempting to make a huge return. We see that there's a lot of cold water on the west coast, but we also see that that cold water along the west coast is forecast to fade through June, July, and August. And the latest forecast from the European model not eliminates, but slows down the negative PDO, brings in a very strong El Nino signal, negative Indian Ocean dipole, very warm water in the Atlantic Ocean as well, along the main development region for hurricanes. And the latest forecast, take a look at this, very aggressive from the European model on building possibly a moderate strength La Nina by late summer. So we need to watch this carefully and continue to have this discussion. That'll be the topic for tonight. We'll see what this could mean for precipitation and temperature signals for this growing season. So I look forward to talking to you then. Have a good one. Thanks.